Alyssa, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Carson. I'm here in Denver, Colorado area, and I've actually got our deputy director here sitting beside me, so she may slip in and out of the frame. But our program called At the Table with Dr. King, in some ways it probably shouldn't exist. I feel underqualified in a lot of ways to have led this program for all these years, and kind of came to it almost by accident. There was a program that the city of Aurora, Colorado, you may know Aurora, Colorado for the infamous theater shooting. The city of Aurora, Colorado had been putting on a Dr. King program for the national holiday for about 18 years, since it became a national holiday under Reagan, and then they were doing it consistently every year and doing a bang-up job here in Colorado. But the gal who was in charge was starting to get tired of her own ideas and was perhaps looking for just a fresh take. And at the time, this was back in 2002, I was working at Colorado Community Church, which happened to own a facility right in the middle of Aurora, Colorado. So in the fall of 2002, it was the head of the city of Aurora's community relations department who approached the leadership team at Colorado Community Church, which I was a part. And she was inquiring just about using our centrally located facility to do something in honor of Dr. King. She had a week-long celebration plan, but wanted to end it with something special. So she and I struck up a relationship really around our similar interest in music. I'm a musician by trade. And not long after, we agreed that she could use the facility to do what she wanted to do, she actually asked for some of my creative input into the program. They were trying to revamp it. And then she got to know me a little more and decided she wanted to ask for some creative leadership. So there I was, kind of sitting in a position where, as an artist, I felt excited about the notion of possibly celebrating Dr. King's legacy through music. But I was by no means a Dr. King expert. So I was chatting with my boss about this opportunity, and he was a huge fan of Dr. King and started to, I guess, convert me, if you will, into just being somebody who appreciated the work that he did while he was alive and the legacy now that he is gone. And I didn't know much at the time. I still have a lot to learn now, but what I did know is that I wanted to honor his legacy well, and I wanted to do it creatively in some kind of way that really cut through white noise, a way that people would pay attention. So I, along with a couple of colleagues, started by going on a several-day trip, called it field research. We started down at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, which is also the Lorraine Motel and also where Dr. King was assassinated. And we spent some time there, and we spent some time at the King Center in Atlanta. And that was really just the beginning of my journey. And then, of course, you got to get into the readings and the speeches and start studying. And all of it was a joy. Humbling, difficult at times to make sense of it all and figure out what story to tell, but very much a joy. And I couldn't believe that I was being asked to do such a thing. So that was the beginning of my journey, and that eventually led to the creation of what's now called At the Table with Dr. King, which is a live presentation, and it highlights a particular moment in King's life, which I've become comfortable calling it a moment of calling for him. And I'm not sure who it was, but someone on our immersion trip handed me a cassette recording of Dr. King talking about something which happened to him on January 27th, 1956. And the way he describes it in the speech, he received a phone call at midnight while he was in his parsonage in Montgomery, Alabama. He was 26 years old. And this would have been less than 6 weeks after the successful year-long bus boycott in Montgomery, which of course really put him on the world stage. And he describes that the voice on the other end of the line that night was ugly, specific threat. Told him, you have 3 days to get out of town or we're going to blow your brains out and blow up your house. And when I heard Dr. King talk about that in his cadence and the way that he speaks, the way that only he speaks through this warbling cassette tape, it was like a magnet. I was just really drawn into his story. I couldn't imagine something like that happening to me, and I've got an imagination. And later, I came to find out that he had received multiple similar phone calls every day while he was just trying to be a young Baptist minister in Montgomery. But on this occasion, he talks specifically about how the phone call shook him. He hung up the phone, and while sitting there alone in his kitchen, he admitted to himself and God how frail he was. As he's recounting that night in a speech that I heard, he said plainly, I was weak. And he was desperate to know whether or not he was in this struggle alone. And that's something I related to. And it's the moment in King's life that I knew I wanted to share with other people. It's the story that I wanted to try to tell. And I thought I could tell that story well because I related to it. You know, lots of people have heard all or portions of the dream speech. Many have studied his letter from Birmingham jail, but I sensed that very few people had heard this speech about the night he almost gave up. And the way we tell it to students is that had the end of that phone call been the end of the story that night, we might not know King's name. It's possible because he was ready to take a big step back from this leadership position. He may not have, ended up so prominent in our history books. Who knows if certain laws would be on the books today, but that's not how that night ended. It ended with really the Webster's dictionary definition of the word calling. A strong inner impulse toward a particular course of action, especially when accompanied by conviction of divine influence. If you go to the Montgomery parsonage today, you'll find it's a national historic landmark, and there are tours. If you're lucky, you'll get the same tour guide I had when I visited. He was an elderly woman. She had marched with Dr. King, and when you go into the kitchen where King once sat alone, she'll tell you without mincing her words that night King was not alone, and that indeed it was divine intervention in the kitchen which inspired him to continue the work. So that event, which took place at the Montgomery parsonage at the kitchen table, is so central to the story that we're trying to tell that we actually titled the presentation At the Table with Dr. King. And when we're performing, we're making an assumption. We're assuming students will, at some point in their lives, face a crossroads where it will be imperative that they learn to listen before acting. Listen for what they're being called to do. And then they're going to need to decide if going forward along the path of their calling is even worth it. And if they're paying attention to what we're telling them, and Dr. King's example in Montgomery, the answer will be no, it's not worth it, if it means they're moving forward in their own strength. King needed to know he wasn't alone, and that there was a reservoir of strength available to him. And that's our particular contribution to students learning about all things Dr. King, because they won't read that phrase in their history books, that he needed to know that he wasn't alone. So as students are trying to figure things out in which lane they're going to run in, we try to challenge them directly to listen first and then to respond with courage and stay along the path of their calling, because they will not be alone if they are truly called to do what they're doing. So you go back to the beginning, we wrote a script. We assembled songs inspired by the civil rights movement. We recruited some of Denver's top musicians, some spoken word artists and a crew, and performed at the closing ceremony for the City of Aurora's 2003 week-long celebration of the National King holiday. A local TV crew captured it, and after the program was over, the City of Aurora asked us to do the same thing the following year and then the year after that. And the same local TV crew came and captured all 3 of those first years. So that's how the program began. And then after 3 years of doing what we might call the 1.0 version of the show, it went dark for about 18 months. And then sometime during 2007, the 2.0 version, which is really the current version of the live show, was born. and that, with the intent of making the content fit for students of all ages. So it started out as sort of a community, citywide type of thing, and the 2.0 version was really geared towards schools and students. Mostly middle school on up to undergraduate level college is where we see most of our bookings coming from. The new version of the show debuted in 2009 and began to tour nationwide in 2010. The first overseas tour was to Bangalore, India in 2014. I see, on the call today, and I'm assuming every week, that there are several Indian nationals chiming in here. So it was amazing to be in Bangalore in 2014. Caitlin, who I told you is sitting next to me here, spent 6 months living in India, mostly in Bangalore, but touring around. And so we have some wonderful connections down there, and we've been several times. But in 2014, it was just amazing to see King's legacy alive in India and to better understand his connection to Gandhi, and knowing that he was there and why he went, and some of the things that he did there, and then just seeing it still resonate. There was a local Bangalorean, somebody can help me, accompanied us to all the schools we visited and helped contextualize the message, but it wasn't a stretch for him. It was evident students in India, they were quickly resonating with the concept of calling. I think it's because the country has so many unique challenges, and students, they're wonderful students there, and they're contemplating which, how to spend their lives, which lane to run in, how to choose what college they're going to go to. And it seemed to make good sense to them that they ought to do what they've been called to do. That's 2014. 2018, we had a particularly wonderful experience as we partnered with the U.S. Department of State for a 6-day tour of Israel, during which we performed in concert halls all over the country to like a mixed student audience of Israeli Jews, Arabs, and Bedouins. And according to our hosts, that particular mixture was rare in the same room. And it was a definite part of the U.S. cultural mission in Israel to get the young people together, to tackle society's challenges together. And 2018 is the year that marked 50 years since the assassination of Dr. King. So the tour of Israel had a very special feeling about it. And boy, we still think about that. And we were invited to do some workshops while we were there. That was an honor for adults. We did one in Beersheba. We did one in Jerusalem at the American Center. And it's just amazing how small the world is, and how everybody's discussing similar societal issues and looking for solutions. I think that's maybe a decent segue into talking about what we've been doing lately. And we put together an online video version of this show, somewhat out of necessity, but I think we may have decided to do that at some point anyway. But really, it's the State Department in Tel Aviv is already telling their staff that the program exists, that it's available online. And as we speak right now, they're strategizing how to make it accessible to schools all over Israel this fall. So it's very humbling. It's a privilege. And we're lucky, I think, that just 2 days before Colorado's stay-at-home order, we were able to get a cast and crew together and descend upon an old television studio south of Denver, create this video version, it's now accessible to schools and other organizations via the Webinar Jam platform, which is kind of like Zoom. And it's not simply our live show filmed, it's actually got its own unique flavor and attempts to make the most of just video as a medium. We've added some more civil rights era footage than we typically show live. We've added a kind of bio so people can understand more why I've chosen to spend my life doing this. We've even added some more music. So it's really wonderful to have worked on this. And I guess we might call this the 3.0 version of the show. And I know that Mira Foster, who's I think on, I think she's seen this video. I'm not sure if anybody else has, but feel free to chime in if you've seen it. Yeah, okay, Alyssa saw it, cool. And there's not terribly much more that I want to say about it in terms of introduction, other than I think there's a couple parts of the show that are my favorite. One is something else I didn't know before we started doing our research, which is that the dream speech was not really the planned speech that day. I know that we have some Dr. King experts and enthusiasts here, and Dr. Carson literally kind of wrote the book on Dr. King. So I know that this is common knowledge to some of you, but to me it was not. That his planned speech that day was different, and it was Mahalia Jackson, the gospel singer, that was sitting behind him, saying, "Hey, tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream." And in that moment, there he is. He has to make a choice if he's going to go with his planned remarks or kind of go with Mahalia Jackson's call, if you will, right? So there's another example of calling, literally being called to action. And at that point, he had to make a choice. Do I tell him about this dream that Mahalia has heard me talk about, or do I kind of go on with my planned remarks? And, of course, he went on, he diverted and went straight to this dream concept. And now, it's one of the quintessential speeches in American history. People all over the world know it. And that's because of this call and response moment, which is very fun to demonstrate musically. We have some incredible jazz musicians that we tour with. So as one of the songs is wrapping up, we have this moment that's just call and response between a couple of the instruments. And we put a rhetorical question on the screen. What's more empty than a call with no response? And then we talk about what it could have been, what the dream speech day could have ended up like had it not been for Mahalia. So that's one of my favorite moments. The other is simply a definition of calling that we put on the screen, which is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. It's a quote from Frederick Buechner, an American author. And I think during these trying times around the world right now, whether it's the ongoing racism in the US or challenges in India or elsewhere, students are going to be compelled to do something. In some cases, they're going to have no choice because all of their friends are going to be doing something, or they're going to be called into an action that's just, the call is so strong they can't resist. And I think we as educators can encourage them to identify their world's deep hunger. I think that's step one. And for instance, right now, there's a deep hunger for equality in America. So good, let's get started. I mean, what specifically can you, student, do? What should you do? What will you do? What are your skills? What are your interests? What are your particular gifts? What's your unique experience? Or what Buechner calls your deep gladness. How might you bring it to bear, not just for your own personal satisfaction, but for the benefit of somebody else? I mean, I just love to imagine all of us, especially the current and next generation of students, thinking like this. I wish somebody would have told me that when I was in middle school. How can I be involved in a way that kind of fits how I'm wired, how I'm, bent? How can I be effective rather than just sort of a mob mentality? How can I uniquely contribute and do it for the sake of someone else, not for my own thing, but for somebody else? So we're going to keep soldiering on, but I guess the reason why I contacted Dr. Carson and Mira and I were talking, and then Alyssa and I, it's really because of this new video, and we're very excited about it because we've gotten wonderful initial responses, and now, of course, it takes away the barriers of having to be in a given location with it's expensive to fly 10 or 12 folks around the world, or even fly them different parts of America. So it's we're excited that it exists and that people can have access to it now wherever they are, whenever they want. So anyway, that's, I guess, all I have to say for now, and love to hear your questions or thoughts.
So Dave, do you think it would make sense to show the short video, the 3-minute version, for people to get a sense? I don't know if you've watched it because you saw it in the invitation link. Can you raise your hand? Okay, so just a few people. So my thought is, I mean, there's something really special about seeing what you're talking about. And you do a beautiful job of talking about it, but seeing what you're talking about, I think, is really valuable. So sure. Do you have quick access to that link, and we can share your screen and show people? It's about 3 minutes, I think.
Yeah, it's actually just I think it's a little less than 2.5 minutes. And sure. And what we put on this little sampler was mostly the music. I think as a musician, that's just you know, when people ask me to boil things all the way down, it usually ends up being a song. So what you won't see on this is a lot of the footage that we have, and we're excited about the footage that we have because it came to us through a contact at CBS News. If you're outside of the US, CBS is one of the major news networks here, and CBS is, like other networks, is sitting on a whole bunch of footage, and they made it available to us. So we do get to show students all kinds of interesting things during the course of the show. But I think what a lot of the students talk about when we survey them afterwards is they really do enjoy the music so much, and just it makes them feel like they're a part of something special. And you can do almost any type of messaging through music, and people will pay attention. So we've put together a 2-minute, 15-second, just a quick little sampler. The full show is about 45 minutes. So let me.
So we've made you a co-host, so you can share your screen.
Okay, cool. Give me 1 second to pull it up.
Okay.
See if I have it already up. Okay. This is.
And that.
All right, so I've got it dialed up, and if I do this right, I'm going to try to make it a full screen, but let me share screen first. Is that good so far?
We still see you.
Still see me? Okay, how about now?
Yep.
That's better. So I'm going to click on it and hit full screen, and we'll see what happens.
And therefore, we must work
Perfect.
with determination to solve the problems that exist in all of our communities.
Listen, that's where it starts. When we listen, we're opening more than just our ears.
I tell you what, give me a second, because that's actually the full show. My mistake.
Oh, okay.
Go over here. Okay. Here you go.
And therefore, we must work with determination to solve the problems that exist in all of our communities.
Come on in, where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is coming.
And just when the struggle got the best of him, when the weight was too much to throw over his shoulder anymore, his dream took on a voice and spoke. Martin, are you listening?
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Don't let
Bottom line, if you're wondering what to do with your time, with your life, start by listening. Then don't hesitate to do what you've been called to do.
That's what this is about. You understanding your calling and having the courage to take someone there.
I know a place. Ain't nobody crying. No. Worry. No. Ain't no smiley faces. Right into the races. I'll take you there. Take you there. I wanna take you there. Take you there. Take you by the hand.
Share. All right. Are we still shared?
We're still shared.
How about now?
Now we see your beautiful face.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
I just as a personal comment, when I was filming for my online course on King, I sat at that kitchen table,
Mm.
and we actually filmed that incident in that house, and so it really, I can imagine it's for you, and as it was for me, a very moving experience
Yeah.
being there and trying to imagine that.